All right, so it's been a while since I've posted anything on this channel, and there are some reasons for that. And I think, in the spirit of the channel, talking through them might be interesting because I want to share findings that I've taken away from the videos I've made so far and explain why I might be hesitant to make some more videos, some thoughts about what I might do differently in the future. I've got a couple of key findings that I can say for my videos so far. The first one, I already knew this, but I have really high standards. I do not want to put out content that I myself don't think is pretty good for what I'm doing. Generally, my judgment of that is pretty much my own. So when I watch some of the videos on my channel right now, there are generally things that I like about all of them, but I'm embarrassed when I post things that I think aren't as good as I would like them to be. I'm becoming pickier about what I feel like I can put myself towards, how good my presentation should be. Another thing that happened is Ethan Klabowski, who I deeply admire with his food videos. He started doing videos that actually covered the same topics I did. He did vanilla taste tests and talked about extract versus imitation, and he explained the difference between flours and baked goods and all that. And frankly, in most aspects, he did way better than I did anyway. So I feel like, he's really up to the bar. Like, unless I can do as well as he does, maybe I need to pivot and try something else. I don't know. Well, there's the obvious other finding for my videos is that talking naturally into a camera and a teleprompter is really tricky because I've got bulgy eyes that stare into the camera for minutes on end. I promise I'm not trying to do that. It just happens, like something about my eyes trying to focus on the little teleprompter with all the lights around me. Just that's what happens to my eyes when I do that. And I come off as uncomfortable in my videos, I guess because I literally am physically uncomfortable while I'm recording. I'm getting better at it. If I can figure out a setup that feels more comfortable, go off script a little bit more in a way that feels natural. It's definitely a thing that gets better with practice, and I don't think anyone's born knowing how to do that awesomely without practice. So in general, I think like a lot of people these days, I've been rethinking my relationships with internet media and social media and figuring out where I should be spending my time. I think about your attention as a currency in the modern world. Like, you wouldn't spend your money on just anything. You want to spend it on specific things that are going to be worth the value. I think attention can be treated the same way. You only have so much of it to pay on any given day. We literally call it paying attention. So I want to make sure if I'm watching something or if I'm producing something that someone else would watch, I want it to be worthy for the value. Because I am terrified by the size of the modern internet. The idea that if you want to learn how to cook a steak, you can search steak recipes on YouTube, steak cooking methods, and you can find literally thousands of videos on just that one subject. And when I think about myself in that arena, if I'm not going to bring anything unique to that, I don't want to do it. I don't want to be in that space. I'm not going to make a video just for the sake of making a video. If I'm going to rise above the level of generic content there is on the internet, it has to be good and it has to be up to my personal standards. But I often think about this thing that Alton Brown said in this really awesome TV interview.
And it's why chefs write some of the crappiest recipes on earth. One of the reasons that the more and more chefs who write cookbooks, people don't necessarily cook any better.
I feel that way about the current content landscape. There are all sorts of people trying to teach you things, but the more we have people trying to teach us stuff, we're not necessarily learning any better. It's like we're not engaging as deeply with the content. But there is the other side of me that says, well, it's not that big of a deal if you make content that covers the same that other people have covered before. As long as you do it in a unique way, you'll reach a different audience. Different people have different tastes. So there is value in you repeating things that have been done before in a different way. But I find the balance really tricky. Another finding that I've taken away is, so when I first started Foodie Findings, I had a few specific themes in mind I wanted for the channel, and I chose some things that I specifically didn't want to be. There is a whole genre of YouTube videos that is nerdy middle-aged white guy tries to convince you that he knows everything about food. I know that inevitably my content will be at least adjacent to that, but I don't want to come off as a know-it-all. I don't want to come off as someone who just says stuff but doesn't really back it up or doesn't have the expertise to be trustworthy. In my videos, I do my best to try to say it depends or it matters or this is just what I found out. The wider story is probably more complicated. I'd like to think that if I've done my job right in my videos, you walk away from them thinking, oh, that's interesting. That's more complicated than I thought it was. You actually walk away with less confidence in what you know, because that's what I experience when I learn about food, is I'm like, oh, I've heard people say that all my life and that's not true. What is true? It's easy to debunk something that's wrong, but moving on past that debunking and figuring out what's true, there's usually no easy answer to that, and I try to reflect that in my videos. But every once in a while, some of my videos, I would say like the fish safety one, and also my video about tallow and fat properties, I make some bigger claims in those videos that maybe I shouldn't have, and I guess I'm learning that what I'm doing is kind of tangential to journalism, and good journalism is hard and requires a lot of skill. And I keep going back and forth on this, like how good of a journalist can I as a random person be? I think it's totally okay to have an amateur do some very high level research and present about something as long as they're honest about the limitations of what they're doing. As long as you don't present yourself as an expert, if you can explain where you got your conclusions from so that people can at the least check your sources and see if you're full of crap, you got to do that. So I do try to list sources in my video descriptions. But there are some times in my videos where I come off as a wannabe Adam Ragusa. Say what you will about Adam Ragusa, but he definitely is a good journalist, good researcher, and I'll be honest, I'm not that, and I shouldn't pretend to be that. I don't want to try to be that because I'm just frankly not qualified to be that. I think my videos are at their best when I do a small scale experiment that just runs through a real world scenario and gives you something tangible that, literally showing that different potatoes from the same bin at the grocery store fry up differently. That's great. But again, going back to what I wanted to do with the channel, I specifically didn't want to come off as a wannabe Adam Ragusa. I haven't totally failed at that, but I have crossed the line a few times, I think. So I'm at the very least dedicated to trying to not do that in the future. We'll see. And every once in a while, when you're a content creator, inevitably you'll get people who call you out on your weaker moments. And when they're not done in a good spirit, I just try to dismiss them as well as I can. But when they're done in a respectable manner, I try to take them to heart, honestly, because I have high standards and I can appreciate that viewers do too. Like if I'm going to say bold claims, I probably should be held to a high quality of standards. So I wish that if someone made a video explaining something and you got some details wrong, I wish the natural response to that was, well, let's find out the truth together. If I'm wrong in my videos, I would love for you to prove me wrong. I'm open to that. So I don't know if there's got to be a way, and maybe it's just in my videos literally saying something like this, but I would love if videos were a back and forth rather than, hey, you got one or two details in your video wrong, therefore I assume you're just super sloppy and I'm probably not going to believe anything you say. That's definitely going too far the other direction, but there's got to be a way to improve on that, to get a better relationship with people who, rightfully so, can call me out on my bullcrap. Pardon my French. Another thing I've taken away is that especially when I watch other videos that I really like about how they explain something is the process is more important than the conclusion, right? An expert can try to explain a truth to you and take, for example, the French foodie guy, Alex, on YouTube. He has the video about mayonnaise as a mother sauce. He could have just made that video and said, hey, did you guys know that mayonnaise is actually a mother sauce if you go back to the original French non-translated version of the Escoffier book? But that's not what the video is. The video is like a 15-minute long journey of him getting to that point. Something becomes trustworthy when you really understand where it's coming from and you know that it follows a really good chain of logic and research. And that's something where in some of my videos, like especially the fish video, the fish safety video, I feel like it would have been better if I explained when I made a claim of this is a thing we know for sure, this is a thing we don't know. If I had at least explained why I came to that conclusion. I cite my sources in the description, but I should at least talk through a little bit about why I trusted that source or what I thought of that source or how did I end up at that source. Like I probably looked at 5 other research paper abstracts before I landed on that one. What was that journey like? It's one thing to teach facts and rote memorization, but if you can teach people how to learn about food and be smart about food, I think that's something that would benefit food research especially. Because like America's Test Kitchen, when they explain how a recipe works, they'll show you at least a little bit of their methodology of how they came to these conclusions. Explaining more about how you come to your conclusions is way more important than what your conclusions are. And to me, it's more interesting. Like this method is better for cooking French fries. But if you're just trying to make good French fries, you're just going to get that from a recipe video. If you're trying to learn a bit more about the discovery food science side of things, you have to show more of the journey and the experiments and how you come to those conclusions. Another takeaway I've had in the last year especially is another thing I can quote from Alton Brown, where he says, "Good eats as good of a show about cooking as it is."
Do you think teaching someone to cook is something that can be accomplished by television?
No, ultimately, no. There are too many parts of it that are interchange about you and me together. You know, in the end, there is just the manual activity of cooking. And it is amazing how many ways there are to foul it up. And if we don't have that transference of one-on-one instructional, we lose it. And there is a lot of talent in food media, and the pervasiveness of the subject, we're still not great cooks.
If you actually want to learn cooking and teach people how to cook, you do have to do that in person. And I've actually done that a pretty good amount this year. I host a meetup through the Meetup website where once or twice a month during the warm seasons, I'll go out to a public park and grab a picnic bench there and bring a portable butane burner and ingredients prepared and explain how to make recipes. And it's just free for anyone to show up. I've actually been doing this on and off for about the last 5 years, but this last year it really took off and I had some really good experiences with people getting involved in the recipes and asking me good questions. And I have to say, especially with internet social media spaces seeming more and more problematic or confusing or weird these days, just having good lessons in person has been a really good outlet for me. Like I can still be nerdy, I can still research something and present it. One really good example was I learned a lot about Detroit style pizza. And actually, I should probably just show you what this looks like. So when I'm learning about food, I use this program Evernote, which is just basically a note-taking app. And you can see all the research I've done on different subjects. Some of these journaling documents I have about just when I learn something interesting about food, I'll write it down. And so I have dozens of these documents about different kinds of food that I've learned about and different tidbits about history and recipes and all that. So good way of showing that I do enjoy learning just for learning's sake. I am totally fine with learning something and not trying to show it off. But at some point I know enough about something that I like to share it, which is, if I learn enough about vanilla, I'll make vanilla videos. But you can see here, if I drill into my Detroit style pizza, because it had been so long since I've made a Foodie Findings video, it had actually had been about a year since I'd done this kind of research and deep dive into a recipe, into a food, and I really appreciated it. It's been good to get back to that. So this Evernote here is a good example of just kind of how my brain works and how I learn about food, and obviously it's quite a challenge to take all of this and turn it into a video or some of the in-person meetups that I do. I think if I made a video about that, it wouldn't have been as good of an experience for me. If you just want to know the history of Detroit-style pizza or a recipe about Detroit-style pizza, that's already covered. There are interviews with people who are actually from Detroit that can talk about that. I don't need to talk about that, but if I can make the recipe in person with people who don't really know anything about Detroit-style pizza, and they get to try it, they get to see it in action, that's been a really good outlet for me. I'm definitely going to keep doing some more of the in-person events. I'm here in Utah. If you're in Salt Lake City area, if you go to the meetup website, when spring rolls around, you can come to my meetups. Shameless self-promotion. Another finding for my videos, I would say, is that it's kind of about my videos, but it's also about how I'm personally approaching food and recipes these days, which is, honestly, I'm kind of burnt out on being obsessed with food at the level that I sometimes am. There's this gap between foodies and normal people that exists in the world. Foodies are people who just inherently love learning about food. They want to know the history. They want to learn all about the ingredients. They want to know the best way and all the different ways to make a recipe. But the thing is, most people are not like that. Most people just want to eat food that tastes good. Maybe they're worried about cost, maybe they're worried about health, maybe they're worried about some other things, but they're not thinking about it that often. One of the best examples I've ever seen this in a piece of media before is there's a Parks and Rec episode where they have a hamburger cook-off, and you've got this foodie guy who makes a super fancy burger, shows it off, and people love it, and they think it's awesome. But then Ron Swanson comes in with his burger, which is described as meat on a bun, but people try it and they love it. They think this was way better than the fancy foodie burger. And the foodie guy says, "What? I don't get it." But then he says something that's extremely important is he says,
"It's been a long time since I've had a hamburger."
That sentence right there says it all. Foodies are so disconnected from normal people. For a lot of them, it's been a long time since they've just had a hamburger. There's something really interesting in that disconnect between foodies and normal people. And that's something that in my videos at my best, I do try to bridge that gap. That's something I'm thinking about. How can I take all of these things that I've learned about this food and present 10 minutes of that information in a way that makes people appreciate their food more or feel more confident at the grocery store or when they're making a recipe? I'm definitely thinking about that. But when I'm grocery shopping, when I'm actually making food for myself, I prefer to think really simply about that. I really make very simple food for myself most of the time. My standard breakfast is a nuts and grains loaded steel cut oatmeal mix that I just bake into a mush. And then my dinners are usually just bags of frozen veggies and rice, maybe a little bit of meat and with some sort of sauce all slopped together in a bowl. I love this simple, good approach to food, and it's hard to keep that up mentally with a foodie findings style approach. And it is funny how just the way I think about food and the way I actually approach food are so distinct and different from one another. And the final finding I would say is that, I can't say that I'm ending foodie findings here. I definitely don't want to, but I don't have any immediate ideas for what I want to do next. But I have some things that I might think about exploring. Keeping everything in mind that I've learned so far that I've explained in this video, I'm thinking it would be awesome if I could really focus on something small and narrow that I could uniquely do that other people aren't doing. A great example of this is there's this guy who goes around and tries to identify and eat as many unique exotic fruits as he can. He's done hundreds of these videos, and that's all he does. He just goes and finds fruits that you've never heard before. Sometimes it's a challenge just to track down those fruits. What I love about that is something that only one person can do. He is probably the only person on the planet who's actually sought out hundreds of unique exotic fruits and documented about them himself. As long as videos are going to be just me doing something on my own, there might be something like that I can do. I would love, for instance, to travel to Mexico and go get some sort of translator to help me out, take cooking lessons from natives in that area, and just learn the things about food that you can only learn from actually being in those places. You know, you can read all the Mexican cookbooks that are available in the United States as much as you want, but I'm sure if you're actually in Mexico, you could learn things that you would never read in any cookbook. It would be really cool to be able to uncover and discover some of those things. Or it would be really awesome to go to Peru and actually explore all of the different potatoes that they have there. I've heard they have hundreds or thousands of potatoes there, and I bet you can find some videos kind of along those lines, but I bet if you were actually there, if you actually looked at those potatoes, looked at the different farms, actually cooked them and prepared them right next to each other, those are things that you don't get in most America's Test Kitchen kind of videos or recipe videos. Like, there is something unique that could be discovered and shared through that, I think. Yeah, so in sum, I have high standards of quality. I don't want to be too preachy. I love doing in-person meetups, and I want to do more videos, but I don't have anything immediately in mind yet, but I'll definitely post them here if I have them. Even if it's not in video form, if it's just through my in-person meetups, rest assured that I am still learning about food, making findings, and sharing that with people when I can. If you actually subscribe to this channel and you actually watched through all of this video, thank you, you're a trooper. Also, you need to get a life. Probably you don't need to hear me blabber on for half an hour about this stuff, but I appreciate it. I appreciate it.